Record. All right. Welcome to the Sedated Man, episode 55. It's a show to encourage Christian men to step up and step out from a culture that would see their demise. I want to thank you for being here. If this is your first time, thanks for listening. And if you're a regular, thanks for returning, of course. I'd also like to ask that when you're done with the podcast, you take a minute and leave a review on whatever platform you happen to listen on. And lastly, we keep all of our show notes on patreon.com/thesedatedman. There's a lot of past show notes and there'll be, of course, current show notes, and all of the links on the newest pages are updated so they continue to work correctly. You can also donate and help support the podcast there. And with that, our guest today on episode 55 is Gene Curl of the Recovering Faith podcast. And the title of this one is The Grace of God, an interview with Gene Curl. Thanks for coming, Gene.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, as we start out, Recovering Faith, obviously you have there was a reason that you started the podcast, but why don't you take a second to give us your background and why the podcast?
Okay. My big motivation for the podcast is, well, first I like to talk, but the other thing is that I've always been interested in religion. I like to tell people that there's been times in my life when I was absolutely certain there was a God, and there's been a time in my life when I was absolutely certain there wasn't, but there's never been a time in my life where I couldn't carry either way. So, but I grew up with in a religious home. My father was a ordained Baptist minister, but he wasn't a very nice man. And so he was mean to me and my sisters and my mother. And so that kind of caused me a bit of doubt. I always wondered why God let things like that happen. And so when I was in my late teens, I moved to Idaho, and I wound up joining the Mormon church, partially despite my father because he hated the Mormons, and partially because everybody was so nice and they convinced me they're just another Christian religion. And there was this girl. You've heard of flirt to convert. So
yes, I have heard of flirt to convert. Yes.
So anyhow, I wound up joining them, doing the whole 2-year mission. I had a lot of doubts, but I convinced myself that it was a problem with me, not a problem with the church. I thought that if I studied more, that I would have more faith, but it had the opposite effect. Eventually, I came to the point where I just couldn't believe it, and I was just absolutely certain that it was not based on factual events. And so I felt kind of let down by God. And so for a while, I was angry with God. And then I decided that it was easier to believe that there wasn't a God than it was that God loved everybody except for me. So I just, for a while, just stopped believing altogether and became an atheist. And I was against religion for 3 years before God finally showed me the error of my ways and put the right people in my life to get me back to religion. So, and I decided that since I'd pretty much run the whole gambit of religion, that I thought that my experiences could help other people who are struggling with faith. So that was the motivation for starting the podcast, was to help other people who are struggling with faith.
Yeah, because it's not just former Mormons, is it?
No, it's not. It's actually right now to date, I think my most popular podcast episode is one that I called "Why Does God Hate Me?"
Mm-hmm.
And so that's right now one of my most popular episodes. That happens to be something that people Google a lot. So
yeah, no, I can imagine. So backing up for just a second, and just so everybody knows, this show isn't about Mormon bashing. My boss is a Mormon. I know a lot of people that are Mormons. Great people. Gene here just happens to be a former Mormon, and that's kind of, I think, what fueled him initially. And then he realized that it wasn't just former Mormons that were looking for info. It was a lot of people who have had poor introductions to religion that he felt compelled. Correct? Is that correct, Gene?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, he wants to introduce them in a manner in which it's not judgmental and they can still pick their own path. So, um, so going back for just a second, we were talking just a little bit before the podcast started. Now I had an abusive father, and Gene also had an abusive father. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, Gene's dad might have made mine look like a 4 or 5. When I felt my dad was probably more like an 8. But my dad never tried to kill me. And as I recall from one of your podcasts, that did happen to you, did it not?
At least once, yes.
Yeah, at least, well, that you're aware of. And he was very physically abusive, and he was a Baptist minister, correct? Southern Baptist minister?
Yes.
You want to touch on that a little bit? I think there's a lot of guys out there who have, okay, without getting on the psychology train, there were a lot of, being raised, by a hard hand is not a sin, okay? Nor is it a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with having a heavy hand with your son, or your kids. But in the case that we're talking about here, we're talking more than a heavy hand. We're talking, flat out neglect, flat out abuse. Straight up to where it could seriously affect a guy's ability to interact socially, the gambit is huge. And so I want to just take a second, because I know there's a lot of guys out there who won't talk about it, who are hurting. And I think that's a big part of the reason guys like Gene and I stepped into this, was so that these guys would begin to feel that they can be comfortable saying, hey, I've got some issues and this is why. So, if you don't mind, Gene, go over your upbringing a little bit, just so the listeners know exactly. So these guys know, what we're talking about.
So, so a little bit about myself growing up. So my father was, he never let an opportunity pass to bring God and religion into the conversation, even if he had to shoehorn it in. But at the same time, he was also, you could say that he didn't exactly practice what he preached. And so he was always pretty much a mean guy. I remember growing up, times that I was riding with him somewhere, and there was somebody had a car crash and pulled over, and I thought we were going to help him, but instead he just wanted to preach to them and tell them that they were dying and going to hell, and there's nothing they could do about it. And he only left and stopped preaching to people because when the police showed up and the paramedics, they told him if he didn't leave and stop hindering them, they were going to arrest him. So, but things like that. And then growing up, and I always tried to please my father, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized I'd never please him. But I tried everything I could to make him happy with me. And he was not only into religion, but he was really into music. So one time when I was a kid, probably about 7, I tried to write a song, and I just thought he would be proud of me for some reason. And I went and showed him this song. I played it with this little keyboard I had. And now, keep in mind, I wasn't a prodigy like Beethoven. As a 7-year-old, I produced the kind of a song that a typical 7-year-old would produce, not like a 7-year-old Beethoven.
Right.
And so he listened to it, and to my great surprise, I don't know why I was surprised, but I was. He said that not only was it a bad song, but he said that God was ashamed of me for having written it, and that was really hit me hard, because I trusted him not only for being my father, but I also, because he was a preacher, I trusted him to get the word of God, and I internalized what he said. So I thought, well, no, it wasn't bad enough that he doesn't love me because he told me as much, but now I knew that God hated me as well. And so that was probably growing up, even though I didn't suffer any physical abuse on that day, that was probably one of the hardest things that's ever happened to me, is when he convinced me that God was ashamed of me. And I remember that I went in the kitchen. I had this like a 6-pound sledgehammer, and I was beating up this little keyboard. And I took the paper that I wrote the words on, I crumpled it up and set it on fire in the middle of the kitchen floor. And my sister came and told me that I was going to get in trouble for doing that. And I told her that I didn't give an insert profanity here, because I didn't really have anything to live for anyway. And so then obviously things like that can be overcome. I have a really good life, and right now, and every day I wake up, I think, life is good, and I thank God that I'm alive. And it would have been nice to have not gone through all that, but of course I did. And sometimes you can help people that way. But there is there's another time he tried to, for whatever reason, he decided he wanted to try to drown me. We went out to this little lake in like November or December. I don't remember why, but I found this little piece of a 2x4, like probably a foot long or something. And so I threw it out in the lake, and I was throwing pebbles at it, pretending it was a ship, and I was sinking it and whatnot.
You were being a boy.
Yeah, I was being a boy,
Yeah.
So he came out there, and he yelled at me and told me he wanted that 2x4, and I needed to go get it. So, it was spitting snow. So I went and grabbed a branch and reached out and tried to get the 2x4, but instead I was just making it go farther, and the wind was blowing. So then he yelled at me and told me that all the horrible things he was going to do to me if I didn't go get that 2x4. So he made me wait out in the water to get it. I was waiting out in the water, and it was extremely cold, and I was begging him to let me come back to shore, but he told me I couldn't come back without 2x4. Well, I couldn't swim at this point. And by the time the water was up to my nose, I realized I couldn't go any farther because I couldn't swim. And so I came back to shore. As soon as I got back to shore, he smacked me and so hard it spun me around and I fell down. Then he picked me up by my belt like he was picking me up a suitcase. He walked out on the boat dock and he threw me off the boat dock. My head hit the 2x4. I cut my forehead. And then, of course, he knew I couldn't swim. He had no doubt about that. And so I was floundering in the water and managed to make it back to the boat dock. And he just looked at me, put his foot on. I was hanging onto the edge of the boat dock trying to climb on the dock. He turned around, put his foot on my face, shoved me back off from the dock, and then turned around and walked away. And so, yeah, that was the kind of man I grew up with. So.
No, I hear you. Jeez. So that would be 2 times then, because I recall the story of when you were driving behind him and he had
cut the brakes. Yeah.
cut the brake line. So 2.
Yeah. So that was quite a bit later. Yeah. The brake line thing, I just got my driver's license, and the 2 of us, we were going to make a trip to deliver some stuff, and we were going over the mountains in Nevada. Well, he didn't have much weight in his truck, but he loaded everything heavy in mine, and we had his 2-way radios, and he kept radioing me, telling me I needed to drive faster and stuff, but I was shifting down and wasn't using the brakes very much. Well, we got to Twin Falls, Idaho, and he pulled over for something, and I was pulling in behind him, and I hit the brakes, and the brake line broke, and my pedal went to the floor.
Uh-huh.
So quick thinking, I hit the clutch and redlined the engine, shifted it into the lowest gear I could get it in, which I think was second.
Mm-hmm.
And then I popped the clutch, and of course it killed the engine, but I stopped about a foot from running into the back of this truck. And so anyhow, when I looked at it, it was obvious that the brake line had been cut, and I think he was hoping that with all that weight using the brakes, that the brake line would break when we're going around these mountains in Nevada, and I would go off the cliff.
Right.
So yeah, that's, he wouldn't have considered it much of a loss. He thought it when he finally did go to prison when his wife finally caught up to him, and he went to prison for some things for the things that he did to my sisters, actually.
Oh, okay.
And so when he was in prison, I went for one time. I decided to go visit him. I don't know why. I just thought it was important to let him know that I forgave him.
Right, because he was your dad. I mean, that's...
And, I figured it doesn't help him any, but for me, I need him to know that I forgave him. So I went to go see him in prison. And he told me he never did anything that he needed to be forgiven for. And the last thing he ever said to me, because I never went to go see him again, he told me that I was his biggest enemy, and he wished that he had either used protection so I wouldn't have been born, or either that he had convinced my mother to have an abortion.
Nice.
So I'm like, okay, I guess there's no reason to go see him again.
Yeah.
And a year later, he died of a heart attack. So,
Well, but at least you got that opportunity to say, hey, I forgive you, which is
yeah.
huge, for the individual. My dad passed. I didn't get that opportunity. And yeah, I mean, it still leaves a hole, so why do I have you say all that? Why do I have you bring all that up? Because, there's a lot of guys out there don't really have anything to compare to. They think, well, maybe I was just too soft. Maybe I was, they'll make all kinds of excuses for their dads when in truth they were abused. And, I mean, it's unfortunate, but those are strengths that can be used to further the kingdom. And, I would just hope and pray that listening to guys like us, they know they can step past it.
Absolutely.
Because for a long time, it was just stuff that you didn't even talk to the church elders about because they didn't know what to do with it. Correct?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
true.
They just look at you. What? Okay. So going back a little bit now, I think when people hear former Mormon, they typically, like we were talking about, they typically think that probably you get more former Mormons that seek you out than not. But would you say then that you lean more towards helping former Mormons, or would you say that you lean primarily towards everybody who's looking for an answer?
More towards everybody. I put a little less than half of my episodes are about the Mormon Church.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, I'm not. Some people have labeled me anti-Mormon, but I think Mormon people are great. And my goal to anything about it's to actually my goal is to help bring them to biblical Christianity.
Yep.
And so, but I think a little more than half of my episodes are for everybody, not just for Mormons or former Mormons, because I know there's so many people out there that are struggling with faith. So many people, especially people who have had so many bad things happen to them, and they think, well, why does God let this happen? Or if God loved me, he wouldn't have let this happen.
Yeah.
So on. And but like Jesus said, he said he lets the sun shine on the just and the unjust, and he lets it rain on the just and the unjust. So just because something bad happens to you doesn't mean that God doesn't love you, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad person.
Yeah. For the Lord disciplines those whom he loves.
Yes, that too.
Yeah. Okay. So I sent you a few questions beforehand. Now, one of your answers, basically I was asking what's one of the biggest questions you get. And one of the questions you put in there was, why would anyone want to follow Jesus and change his or her life when it doesn't guarantee worldly success? Now, I'm sorry, but I find that question hilarious. I get it all the time. Now, to me personally, that's easy. But I want you to answer in the way that you would answer when these people, because if that's one of the questions you get a lot, it should be a pretty quick answer for you. So,
well, let's see.
What is it you tell these guys?
One of the times I dealt with this the most is I was a guest on another podcast called The Quest.
Mm-hmm.
And this lady, she was really struggling with faith. And anyway, and I was telling her that following Jesus doesn't mean that everything's going to go smooth in your life. It doesn't mean that everything's going to work out well. It doesn't mean you're going to be rich. I said, in fact, some of the people that were the most faithful, like Paul the Apostle, for instance, he went from apparently having everything to giving everything up and eventually even being crucified himself. And so, went on for a little bit, and she said, you're not making a very good case for Christianity. I was like, well, that's not why you follow Jesus. If you're only following Jesus because you think you're going to get worldly wealth or whatnot, then you're doing it for the wrong reason. I mean, really, Jesus is not, we shouldn't look at Jesus as a means to an end. We should look at Jesus as the end in and of itself. I mean, we don't follow Jesus because he's of what he can do for us. I mean, that's part of the reason, but we follow Jesus because Jesus is the most worthwhile thing we can ever follow. And even if when we have troubles in this life, Jesus doesn't take away the storm, but he gives us peace in the storm, and he makes it so that we can he might not make that so that things go better in life, but he makes life more worthwhile.
Yeah. So you mean that Jesus isn't an ATM?
Yes. Not insert prayer, receive blessing. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, with that, I want to make sure everybody understands. I am a very abundant mindset kind of guy. So that comment does not mean that I've suddenly gone scarcity, but the Lord's intent is it could be wealth. I mean, look at Job, look at Abraham. But that doesn't mean that if you are poor with finances, that his intent is wealth for you. So, and I don't mean Eugene, I just mean the guys in general. But
yeah,
because blessings take many faces.
Yeah, I mean, that was just my dig at the prosperity gospel, because
yeah,
I heard this one pastor who I heard a sermon. He was telling people, well, you've only got $1,000. Well, that's not enough to buy the house anyway. Give that $1,000 to me and just watch the Lord work. And well, not really the way it works. So,
well, so you can buy his house, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyhow, so yeah, that's another topic. But yeah, that's basically, like, God doesn't promise that you're going to be rich, but He makes it. I mean, some people, they're blessings as well, but
right.
some people are not. Like David and Solomon were blessed with wealth, but John the Baptist wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
And in fact, Jesus even said that of all men that were born of women, there was none greater than John the Baptist.
Yep.
So
he was a wealth of knowledge. There you go.
So, there's all kinds of blessings. And just like we don't all get the same kinds of spiritual gifts from God, we don't all get the same kind of blessings either.
Right.
And it's how He knows what will help us to help others. And so not everybody's an evangelist, and not everybody not everybody gets the same things, because they just can't have everybody be in the head and nobody be in the feet. So
yeah, exactly. Although there's a lot of churches that would think everybody needs to be the head.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me a little bit about, you talked about a false dichotomy. Tell me a little bit about the false dichotomy that you kind of feel society has set up.
Well, there's a lot of those, but one of them.
Actually, explain what a dichotomy is, because some of these guys are like, what?
Okay, a dichotomy is like, it's either an either or thing. So, like if you were to dichotomy makes it where that you only have two choices.
Mm-hmm.
So, where a lot of things in life there are more than two choices, but a dichotomy is where it basically puts it where there's only two choices.
Mm-hmm.
So, like an example of a false dichotomy would either be that you like the color purple, or you're a serial killer, where there's actually a lot of other options. Like, you could like the color purple and be a serial killer, or you could be the greatest person on earth and hate purple, or whatever. So that's just a quick example of basically what it is. But yeah, and I'm trying to remember what situation I used to end my answer there. As far as
here, hang on, I've got it right here. It's that's why we keep it loose. Let's see here. Yes, we are still recording. I'm looking for the dichotomy here. Where'd it go? Oh, maybe I lied here. Hang on. Filling choice. Oh, here it is. It said, you would also like to touch on being loving toward and accepting of people while not approving of their choices. Society has set up the false dichotomy that we have to love and accept every aspect of a person's life in order to love and accept the person, and that is simply not true.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that one. Okay.
So roll.
So, yeah. Okay. Now I know it. Okay. So a lot of people, there's kind of two camps here. There are the far out there evangelicals who think that you have to hate people for their life choices. If they're living a life of sin, you have to hate them. And that if you don't hate them, you don't hate the sin, which is not true. But there's also the other far extreme where people think that if you hate the sin, then you have to hate the sinner. And so if you see a person living a life of sin and you don't approve of the sin, then that means you must hate the person. Well, obviously, that's not true either, because you can completely love a person, but still acknowledge that they have sin in their life, and you love them in spite of their sin. I mean, Jesus loved us in spite of our sin. We all have sin. But just because you love the person doesn't mean that you have to accept the sin in their life. And in fact, I think if you're a true Christian friend, you wouldn't accept the sin in their life, because it's like, if you remember with David, he had two examples in his life of one person telling him what he wanted to hear, but then there was the prophet not telling him what he wanted to hear. He was telling him the truth, even though it hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't need people to pander to us and tell us that, oh, well, it's fine that you do such and such things. It's better to have people that love you, but still in a loving way, point out these things so that you can correct your course. Right. And so, yeah. And I think a good example of that is, like, there's a lot of people right now up in arms because Lauren Daigle refused to come out and flat out condemn homosexuality. And they think that's somehow her responsibility because she's a Christian artist. Mm-hmm. Which, my personal opinion, there's too much hate on there. People need to start worrying about their own sins and not so much about everybody else's. Yeah. But the same thing, she's not a preacher. She's not a religious leader of any kind. She is a singer, so it's not her job to get up there on the pulpit and preach. Right. So with that, I'm not saying that that she's the greatest example of Christianity, and I can't say that I am either. But I'm just saying, it's like people are up in arms because she didn't come out and flat out say condemn.
Because she's a public figure.
Yeah. And I'm like, you're loving people, you're going to come a lot closer to bringing them to Christ than if the first thing you do is you start telling them how wrong they
are. Yeah, that's always a good start. Worked well for your dad. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, you answered the question. All right. And so we're down to the last question. This is the question I ask everybody. Okay. So, what one thing do you think the church needs to change today? And that's as a whole.
What one thing do they need to change?
Yeah.
Well, I think a big thing right now is that there are too many Christian churches that are coming to look too much like the world. I mean, they're trying to be, in an effort to be accepting of people, they have become weak on sin, and so they no longer talk about sin and talk about the things that you never hear of any hellfire and damnation sermons anymore. It's all this feel-good hipster religion. Yeah. And I think that once the church is indistinguishable from the world, it's no longer the church. And I'm not saying that we should go just have hellfire and damnation sermons, far from it. What I am saying is that even you shouldn't be condemning everybody, but at the same time, you should not be accepting of sins in an attempt to be accepting of people.
Or to be accepted.
Yeah, because you should worry more about offending God than you should worry about offending the world. And yeah, that's a big thing. So I think that's probably the biggest thing right now, is there's too many branches of Christianity right now that look too much like the world.
See, and I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a second. No, sorry, but this is one of my hot buttons. All right. Culture has crept into the church, and it crept in there a while ago. All right. And there's a reason that they say that they call it a wolf. All right. Waiting and creeping and waiting for something to devour. All right. So first it starts with, hey, let's just let a little bit here. And then it's a little bit more, and then it's a little bit more. All right. So I can't fathom, because, I mean, this is the Sedated Man. This is a show for Christian men. So let's talk to men for just a second here. You want to know why churches look the way they do? Because you're not doing your job. All right. Now, I don't think that every sermon needs to be hellfire and damnation either, because I attended a church for, I think I did the numbers the other day, almost 30 years, and great people. Okay. But in the end, we could no longer fellowship there, because it was, I don't want to say it was hellfire and damnation. It was all, the government's coming to get you. The preacher said straight up that it was his job to prep you for the jail cell. Now, I don't disagree with that, but I don't think it's what needs to be hammered home every Lord's Day or every Sunday. I mean, it's, yes, you prep a person. Yes, you let them know. But Scripture, to quote Brendan Burchard, motivational guy, his big thing is bring the joy. And if you look in Scripture, the theme is joy. The theme is love. It is not, where are my guns? Who's in political office? Who do I hate this week? More people, I think, who are air quotes. There you go. If you're listening on the podcast and you can't see me, it's air quotes. More people relate, I think, to their political parties or their political affiliations than they do who they are in God. Because you ask people I'm conservative or I'm liberal. Well, whoa, how about Christian? Are you Christian? I don't know. I see you go to church, but is that something you claim? Because it's become so mainstream. And so men need to step up. They need to be the leaders in the church. I've often said that if you think there's change that needs to happen in the church, you push for that change until they ask you to leave. If you're that convicted about it, act like you're that convicted about it. Show God you're that convicted about it. So, sorry, soapbox. I'm off my soapbox. You got anything you want to add there, Gene?
Well, I was just thinking, now with society now is trying to make it so that if you're a man, that you should be kind of like ashamed of being a man, that there's no difference between men or women, but yet, I don't know, this is another one of those things that logically doesn't work, but it's like men are bad and evil, but yet men and women are exactly the same. So either men and women are different, or because if
they're not.
Because if men are completely totally evil, but yet men and women are exactly the same, then that would also mean that women are evil as well.
Oh yeah, that'd be an interesting conversation.
So basically, we are different, and anybody who says that men are better than women or women are better than men, that's not true. But we're intentionally, God intentionally made us different so that men are supposed to act like men, and God wants us to, but a lot of times I think society wants to make us feel ashamed of trying to feel like we need to be the protector and the provider and fulfilling the role that God told us we should fulfill. So
yeah, the world would like us to be so equal that we're no longer unique.
Yes, and that would be, my opinion, that would be sad.
It would be very sad. And it's especially sad to watch because it's happening. So I never in a million years thought I'd walk up to a bathroom door and see a male, a female, and a she-male, or whatever the heck they call that half dress, half suit thing that they've got on the door. It's like, whoever made the sign didn't finish it. But anyway, so maybe you've seen those. I hate looking at them.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah. All right, Gene. Well, I want to thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate your input. I really appreciate your take on things. You got a great podcast. And why don't you tell people where they can find you normally?
Well, first, if you go any place that has podcasts, iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or any of those places, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to podcasts, if you just put in Recovering Faith Podcast, it'll come up. Or if you search my name, Gene Curl, it's a curl like a curl on your head. Or you can go to my website, which is genecurl.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Gene Curl and Facebook, Gene Curl. So yeah, it's pretty much, I just have everything under my name, Gene Curl, and it keeps it simple. And so yeah, Actually, even if you just Google Gene Curl, you should find it pretty easy. But my website, genecurl.com.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. And if you are looking for us, you can find us on many platforms such as Anchor.fm, iTunes, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Radio Public, Castbox, Breaker, and Spotify, and a few others I probably don't even know about. You can also contact us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, or you can watch the videos. Obviously, I put the videos out on Facebook and YouTube. I was doing it on Instagram. I will start doing it again here sometime in the future. But you can also reach me directly at mike@thesedatedman.com. That's mike@thesedatedman.com. Of course, go to patreon.com/thesedatedman if you're looking for show notes. We do not have a website yet. We are working on it. So once again, big thank you to Gene Curl for coming, and you guys go forth and conquer.